Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Claude Granitsky, and it's been a very busy week for our True Africa University and MIT Center for International Studies and MIT Africa webinar series on sustainable development in Africa. On Tuesday, I actually came to MIT, and at Sloan in the Sandberg Conference Center, I was able to have a fireside chat with the president of Cape Verde. President Neves and I went into a conversation around Africa's e-governance and the digital transformation of Africa. And it was wonderful because Cape Verde is one of the democracies, the true democracies in Africa. They've had 3 elections that were very much driven by digital technology because it allowed for electronic voting. And he also shared a grand vision for what the continent could accomplish through digital transformation. And one of the people who are the leaders of this digital transformation of Africa is actually Tidjane Deme, our guest for today. And actually, Tidjane, I've known for about 15 years. I first met Tidjane when he was working for Google. We met at the Google Paris office near the Opera in Paris. And then he went back to his home country, Senegal, to open the very first Francophone Africa office in Dakar for Google back in 2009. And I was so amazed to see that Google was opening that tiny little office with Tidjane, with also a very clear declaration of very grand ambitions for the African continent. Tidjane is actually now a general partner at Partech, which is also considered one of the major European venture capital funds, but he's also leading, along with his business partner, the Partech Africa Fund. And it's a fund that's exclusively dedicated to Africa's digital markets. I remember when he was starting Partech Africa back in 2016, and Tidjane is very much like many of the MIT students that we engage with. He is a graduate of the Ecole Polytechnique in Paris, and he's also been an entrepreneur. He's been a consultant. He launched YouTube in 6 African markets, and basically, he's the man. So without further ado, I wanted to, number one, thank the MIT Center for International Studies, because the aim of the MIT Center for International Studies is to support and promote international research and education at MIT. We produce research that creatively addresses global issues while helping to educate the next generation of global citizens. I also want to thank the MIT Africa program, which is based at the MIT Center for International Studies. And MIT Africa empowers MIT students and faculty to advance knowledge and solve some of the world's greatest challenges by connecting them with leading researchers, companies, and other partners in Africa. So with that, I will talk about True Africa University. And I'm the founder of True Africa University, in addition to being an MIT alum and a research affiliate at the Center for International Studies at MIT. True Africa was created by Africans for Africa, and our aim for True Africa University is to become a Pan-African learning community that is committed to accelerating Africa's sustainable development by mobilizing a global network of academic, industrial, and institutional partners. So with that, Tidjane Deme, welcome. You are one of the core partners that we have identified for our initiative, and it is such an honor to be with you today. I have to tell you that several MIT students that I saw when I went to MIT on Tuesday for the interview and fireside chat with President Neves were so excited about this session, because you are, don't be modest, one of Africa's leading VCs, and we hope that you can be a proud participant in the digital transformation of Africa. So Tidjane, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Claude, I think what you did not say in your introduction is that when we met in Paris while I was at Google, you were building this grand vision of what True was. And I asked you if it was a brand, and you said, no, it isn't. this is not just a media, this is going to be about education and about everything. And I'm absolutely excited to see that, it's getting there, to see today through university. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Tidjane.
I've struggled with the way to run this session because, frankly, I'm scared of sitting here and talking to you for an hour and not telling you anything new. So if I have only one request, it would be for you to comment in the chat or the Q&A. I think you have access to a Q&A in this session, and also interrupt with any questions. I'll be happy to take it, make it more interactive and more useful to you. With that said, we have a topic that is actually very large and difficult to contain in 10 slides. So I've made harsh choices. Give me any excuse, I'll veer off from the presentation and talk about everything I left out. When Claude asked me to speak about transformative startups in Africa, my first instinct was every single tech startup in Africa is transformative. So it's going to be difficult to take out anything. But let's set some standards or rules of what is transformative. And these are just mine, and I'm happy to change them if you don't like them. But before we go in there, what is transformative in this industry is difficult to talk about because the whole industry is going through an extraordinary transformation. And the one thing, one takeaway I've had from these last 5 years is that all of us, including the most optimistic and bullish of us, always underestimate the ability of people in Africa to adopt innovation and technology. This happened 20 years ago when mobile technology was entering Africa, and we all made business plans that said, a few 100,000 people could afford mobile phones, and that is what mobile networks were going to be in Africa. It happened again when we started looking at internet adoption, and we tried to predict the trajectory of internet adoption. And I remember sitting at Google and a lot of us trying to work on how to make internet accessible on feature phones and not think about how people would switch to smartphones so fast. And today it is a non-question across the continent that everybody will have a smartphone and will be connected. And this happened again when 6 years ago, with my brother Cyril, we decided to go into this VC space. We had to sell Africa and African tech to a lot of people. And we made bold predictions about this industry. We predicted to people that by 2020, the VC industry in Africa would be deploying $1 billion per year. By 2020, we were saying this in 2016, and it sounded like science fiction to many people. That $1 billion mark was achieved in 2018. What you see here, the graph I'm putting here is a graph of my own underestimation of reality. On light blue, this is where we thought the industry was going. Dark blue is where it actually is. As you see, we expected 1.5 billion roughly in 2022. We were above 6 billion already in 2021 and growing. So if there is anything I can take away from this is that any prediction we make about where the tech scene in Africa is going is completely understated. This sector will transform the continent more than we can imagine. The next point I wanted to make is about where this transformation is happening. Today, it's all fintech. It seems all fintech, but I think it's good we remember that it was first about e-commerce. Some of you may remember the Jumia and Konga wars in Nigeria. It was, at least for me, the first time I realized that startups in Africa were growing big, were raising large amounts of money, and were taking over something as big as commerce in Africa. Then it was about fintech. It's been the fintech era for the last 5 years, frankly. But again, if you look deep, you'll find that while in 2021, fintech accounted for almost 70% of investments in Africa. Last year, it was only 39%. It is diversifying. We are seeing clean tech, for instance, taking up, and it's great news. But we're also seeing e-commerce coming back in different forms. We're seeing transformation in mobility, in healthcare, finally in agriculture. So this diversification is much welcome, and it's saying how tech is transforming all sectors of African economies. So these transformative startups, we'll find them everywhere. Now, we'll find them everywhere geographically, we'll find them everywhere across sectors. I'll pause here and give everybody an opportunity to either disagree or mock my inability to predict the future of the African tech. No takers?
I have a few, but I would like somebody else to weigh in. Any MIT students want to drop a question or a comment in the chat?
We'll take them later. They will come.
We'll take them later.
So what is a transformative startup? Again, this is my own definition, as Groucho Marx said it. If you don't like my principles, I have another set for you. But I think as we think about transformative, it's important we start with people, the users. To be transformative in Africa, you have to touch many people or many businesses. And when I say businesses here, the better term should probably be kiosk. You know, all those small merchants and very small businesses, individual businesses that make the economy across Africa. And being transformative for me is about touching these businesses and people at scale. The scale is an important part of this. I think another way startups are transformative is while they touch a lot of people, they enable new industries. For instance, if you think about access to health care, it is only 1%, 2% at best in many countries of the population who have access to health insurance. Any startup that unlocks this is opening up a new industry. If you think about what fintech did in Africa, where in Senegal today, to this day, only 20% of people have access to bank accounts. Mobile money have given access to everybody to bank account and enabled a new class of industries. If you think about existing industries, transformative startups are changing the way these industries operate. And I'll come back to this in later slides. Or even they go into existing industries, redefine completely the value chain, redistribute the value. And finally, very simply, transformative startups will reset the prices and the quality. The way we think about it usually is, can you do 10x better, 10x cheaper? This is what I've come up with as transformative. Again, I think there are many other ways to be transformative, and there are certainly some of the ways to be transformative that we don't think of yet. To take a quick jab at a question that I see on this chat from Heather, what is the primary driver for the missed forecast? I like it. Why did we miss our forecast about mobile adoption, about internet adoption, about tech startups in Africa? I think fundamentally what's going on is we are underestimating the speed at which African people will adopt technology. When technology works for people in Africa, they will adopt it faster than people imagine. And there's probably something to unpack about how we always underestimate the speed of adoption. There's something probably about affordability that we underestimate how quickly things become affordable. But we also underestimate how fast people will learn about these tools and use them in ways we don't expect. In the case of the VC industry in Africa, when I was extrapolating this, I think also there was some aspect of censoring myself. Because, again, if we step back a few years, we are pitching that the tech scene in Africa is taking off one way to measure it is how much money is being invested. And you're looking at that curve. Today, it looks very nice and exponential, but in those days, we were trying to sell something that was very flat, the beginning of an exponential typically, and trying to tell people it is an exponential. So telling them that it was going to be $1 billion in a few years was already a tall order. Saying that was going to happen 2 years from the moment we were speaking, I would probably have lost the whole audience. So there is some aspect of just censoring ourselves. But I can tell you what made it click for me. What made it click for me in 2016 is I looked at data from Canalys about shipment of smartphones. And in 2016, I don't know if you can believe this, in 2016, Africa was already buying more new smartphones than Europe. And for me, that was a shocking data point. It said people were coming online en masse with these mobile phones and were going to use them to access contents, use apps, etc. And startups were going to build it for them and will raise a lot of money to do this. But again, it was difficult for anybody outside this whole space to see this. There was another soft data point that I had that was also very difficult to articulate and share. I had been living and working in this ecosystem for years at that point. And one thing that was very clear to me in 2016, 2015 was that the quality of the tech talent pool in Africa had improved dramatically over between, say, 2010 and 2015 in ways that are difficult to measure. But one anecdotal evidence for me is that in 2015, 2016, I met MIT graduates, Harvard graduates in the streets of Lagos hustling into their new startups. In 2010, you wouldn't meet any MIT graduate in Lagos trying to create a startup. They wouldn't risk that. So there was a qualitative change going on there that made me believe in this. But again, very hard to put numbers behind it and sell it as aggressively as it was. And so we all got it wrong. And the only lesson for me is whatever predictions we are making today, again, we are going to get them wrong. So I'll come back to these transformative startups. Caveat again, this is what I learned over the last 5 years doing investment. I've only done this for the last 5 years, so my knowledge of investment is growing, evolving as we speak. And if you ask me this question again in next year, I'll probably come up with a few different answers. Claude, maybe this is just me pitching for you to invite me again.
With pleasure.
I'll say something completely different and deny I ever said everything I'm saying today. I like the question I see in the chat, that whether African startups driven by African talent will transform Europe and US clients. Yes, absolutely, and I'll come back to this. Please hold on this one. I'll start with the startups that will transform emerging markets. They will transform emerging markets, not just Africa, because they're going after these deep, fragmented, informal markets. It is, I choose this picture, by the way, confession, I generated this picture on Midjourney by asking for a busy market in Lagos. And I think what's going on here says everything about these informal markets. They are deep. If you think about retail in Africa, it is anybody's guess whether it is somewhere between $200 and $400 billion. 95% of it is informal. It's happening in these markets, within these small stores, within these mom and pop stores that you find on the corners of every street and every city in Africa. If you think about mobility, it is these small, it goes from bodas to these small minivans that you can find across all cities in Africa that are owned by the individual driving them most of the time. Informal networks, informal businesses, very fragmented, again, very difficult to optimize. But guess what? When you digitize, when you bring these people on digital platform, all of a sudden, you can organize them, you can optimize them, you can create a lot of new efficiencies. And I'm sorry, I'm going to pick one of our startups as an example of this. Trade Depot was our first investment ever. And it is a company in Lagos that basically sells inventory to retailers. So again, retail, actually, the number I quoted earlier was just about Nigeria, $200 to $400 billion. It's more than $1 trillion in Africa. It is 95% these small retailers. And Trade Depot decided to digitize their supply. First, it was very difficult for me to even understand what Trade Depot was trying to do. It's very difficult for anybody who doesn't know how retail works in Africa to understand it. So we met them and they had 1,500 retailers already ordering from them. They were selling for $500,000 merchandise per month. That's end of 2017. Today, as we speak, Trade Depot is serving 170,000 retailers. So they've grown 100x the retailer base. In terms of top line numbers, they're doing more than $50 million per month. So more than $600 million per year. Again, 100x. And it sounds impressive for anybody. This company has grown 100x over the last 4 or 5 years. But if you look actually one layer down, Trade Depot is only doing less than half of a percentage of the retail in Nigeria. This points to how deep this market is. This company is doing now $600 million per year. You know, very few startups who can do this in Africa and anywhere else. And they still only have a percentage point of their market share. The room for growth is extraordinary. And this is what I like about these informal sectors. We will always underestimate them. They're deep. And you can create value in these sectors, again, because they are fragmented and there are a lot of inefficiencies that you can solve, you can improve. For instance, in the case of Trade Depot, the inefficiency I'm looking at is, the first inefficiency I'm looking at is the logistics. Logistics account for 15 to 20% of the price of these goods in Africa. 15%. If you look in the US, it will be below 5%. And this directly impacts the price of goods, the cost of living for all of the population, actually, including the poorest people. So improving logistics will impact everybody, how they buy and sell, how they consume goods. So again, deep sectors that you can transform with a digital platform and impact everybody's life is square in my definition of transformative. I'll take another one, but I'll look at the question here. I love your questions, guys. I'll have fun taking them about the diaspora. Just to come back on this deep informal markets. Again, remember, these problems are very similar across emerging markets. What's going on here in Nigeria is what is going on in Indonesia, is what is going on in LATAM. So I believe we should see in the near future African startups solving for these informal markets, scale their businesses across emerging markets. Actually, I should not talk about this in the future. There are already a few startups doing this. For instance, if you know of Fair Money, it is a fintech startup, a lending startup that started in Nigeria and that is now operating in Asia and in LATAM. If you think about the first micro insurance startups, they started in Africa and they're now operating, a lot of them are operating also in Southeast Asia. So this is going to happen in emerging market, obviously, but it's also going to happen across the globe. So a second way startups, people are building transformative startups is when they build what I call the infrastructure for businesses. The infrastructure for doing business will, of course, largely serve small businesses. There are large-scale opportunities in doing this. Everybody will think about payments, of course. I like to include into this not just payment, but logistics. What I talked about earlier in Trade Depot is logistics, bookkeeping, all of these marketplaces that enable B2B. What they do is they go into these large scale opportunities and they build something that becomes very quickly an infrastructure that everybody else can build on top. It enables businesses, these small businesses that create jobs, that create wealth, that drive impact in Africa. It also does something really important that is not yet completely understood. It creates transaction data. Transaction data is key to unlocking credit. It's key to unlocking a lot of growth in our economies. So if you think about all of the mobile money players who are enabling payments, digital payments, they're building this transaction data. If you think about all of the B2B marketplaces, I mentioned earlier Trade Depot, but think about Wasoko, think about Vendies. They're creating for the first time, data about the businesses of these retailers. Again, if you think about bookkeeping apps that are starting to pop up everywhere, they create this basic infrastructure that businesses will build from. And then this one I really like, because I think it's a bit counterintuitive for a tech investor. Transformative startups have to do something very hard. They have to build operations at scale. It is very important, if you're going to build a startup in Africa, to get away from this idea that you're just going to scale software. The really hard problems, the really important problems, often have a large operational component. If you're going to build a solution for this, you have to have the courage to go after these operational problems, which means you have to go against the intuition that operations are not scalable. Operations are hard to scale, but the genius of tech is it should enable you to scale operations in a sustainable way. So again, here you have pictures of warehouses that Trade Depot is running. But frankly, this applies to any business. If you think about mobile money networks, they require agent networks. As we speak, GSMA estimates that we have more than 6 million agents active across Africa. They are the ones linking the cash economy to the digital world everywhere. As we speak, startups are going door to door to acquire and enable businesses onto their platforms. You have to do this door to door in many markets. You cannot do it online. For instance, again, to go back to these B2B marketplaces like Trade Depot, they have to deliver goods physically to each of their customers, which means they have to locate them, they have to go there, onboard them, help them install the app, collect the information. And so when I tell you they're serving now 170,000 retailers, it means they've had somebody walk up to the door of 170,000 retailers in Lagos. And they can do this today, they can add another 20,000 every month, which means they've had to build the whole machine to go out there and onboard these people. And this is operations at scale. And this is enabled by tech in ways that are very difficult to imagine from the outside. If you're going to go out there and onboard 20,000 merchants in 1 month, it means you're onboarding almost 1,000 per day. It means you have to build a whole operation and plan it and make it very efficient and cheap. It means you're using a lot of tech to do it. So these hard physical operations, they're hard to build, but once you build them, everybody converges on your platform because you've built the hard stuff that nobody wants to replicate. You've built something that becomes very quickly a platform for everybody. It becomes a commodity. For instance, if you look at agent networks, they become commoditized. You will have now aggregators who will go out there, build agent networks, equip these agents with software, integrate this software with all of the networks, and open it up to all mobile money operators, open it up to all fintechs. Think, for instance, about Fowry, in Egypt. It is de facto the platform on which all fintechs in this country are built. So if you build these hard to build physical networks, you build a commodity that all the businesses around you will use, and it becomes, again, transformative. I'm looking at questions here and seeing if there is a question I should address immediately. Kyle is asking about my use of, sci-fi, and I like this, about whether we are going to launch space shuttles from our latitudes. I'll give you a sort of real life example. I don't know if you guys have heard of Zipline. Zipline is a drone company that started off in Ghana, actually, then moved to Rwanda, and is now very active in the US. They've built, over the last 6-7 years, the complete technology for drone delivery, and they built it from Africa. But it had been clear for me since I've discovered this company 6 years ago that what they're building will be deployed in Europe and the US. But they've picked the best place to do this, the best use case. They were delivering emergency medical supplies in hilly country in Rwanda. And it gave them the opportunity and the space to do all of the research and build this technology, but now they're applying it in the US. So yes, it makes sense to think that we will build these hard industries in Africa and deploy them everywhere. Paul, I'll introduce you.
Maybe we can. Yes. Maybe we can do the questions later when you're done with your presentation, because there's so many that are coming into my box as well. So
okay, so I'll just go through a few of these examples and come back. So actually, I have only a few left. So I was saying, to be transformative, build for deep informal markets, build business infrastructure, build hard physical operations, build something that unlocks blue oceans. I gave the early example of healthcare. Only 2% of Nigerians have access to health insurance. We invested in this startup, Reliance, that is, as we speak, providing a health insurance product in Nigeria for $10 per month. And 2/3 of the people who are on this platform today never had health insurance before. Reliance is doing super well. They've grown fast. They have now General Atlantic as an investor. But again, they've barely scratched the surface because they've opened up a whole new industry, health insurance in Africa. They've made it affordable, and they have a large room to build in. It's a blue ocean for them. If you think about Jamo, that's doing, trying to build from Cote d'Ivoire a neobank. In Francophone Africa, again, less than 20% of people have a bank account. Now, everybody is using mobile wallets, but people still need a bank account. And who is building banks for the next generation of digital native urban African people? You know, more than 40% of people in this region are below the age of having a bank account. And they're going to grow up and they will need bank accounts, and who's building it for them? If somebody unlocks this, you're creating a whole new blue ocean to build in. If you think about, Gebea, that's building a freelance marketplace in Africa. We have all of these pool, again, of young people. We are training them, and then they will work on a global market. Just by creating this freelance marketplace, you're opening up opportunities for them to work for people everywhere in the world. You have a lot of companies now doing this. I'm just giving these as small examples of a lot of the blue oceans that people need to unlock. And I can tell you one thing, most of them we just cannot think of right now as where we are sitting. So this will be, again, transformative. Tech will enable new type of activities and businesses that we just don't think about today, or that we dismiss today as being completely impossible to do in Africa. Again, health insurance in Africa has been considered difficult to do, impossible to do. It's being unlocked, and a lot more is coming. And then I'll come up with this one because I think it will not be something most people will think of. But if you want to be the transformative startup in Africa, you really have to do this 10x better, 10x cheaper thing. And the 10x better is important. You're building for a very large, diverse population, not very tech savvy. It's not a population that's been using computers, for instance. We all used to using computers, so we internalize a lot of, design metaphors. We internalize icons. We internalize a desktop. And building for this market is different. You have to build for people who have not internalized all of these metaphors. You're building for a tough environment. Just one example that I want you to think about. If you walk into a retailer's shop in many African cities, think about this person standing there, and there are 5-10 people at any given time in the shop. They're yelling at him, literally. They're yelling at the shop owner, hey, give me this, sell me this. And so he has to move very fast. And then they're punching numbers in this calculator. You see this sturdy calculator that's sitting on the countertop, and they're just punching numbers on it. This calculator is fascinating to me. It is very resistant. They punch at it very hard all day. It works even after they've spilled water or anything on top of it. And I tell people, if you're going to give device to merchants in Africa, it has to be as sturdy, as strong, and as convenient as this calculator. It's become my sort of standard for what it is, a device that works for merchants. So, your nice touch screen won't make it for 2 days in this environment. So you have to think about user experience globally in this environment, from the device to the software you're providing to the support, kind of support you're providing, and make it really good, really fast. For instance, on payments, the reason merchant payment is still unsolved in Africa is because payment with this merchant has to be better than cash. It has to be fast, incredibly fast. It has to be very convenient. It has to work on all environments. So it is extremely hard to do. But if you do it, you're definitely building something extraordinary. So as we speak, in the streets of Dakar and Abidjan, people have started paying with Wave. And I'm so excited by this because my barber, the lady who's selling peanuts at the corner near my house, all of these people have started accepting payments because mobile payments have become fast and convenient. Another example that comes to mind is this bookkeeping app. We invested in this company in Morocco, and it's the only investment we've done in a company that didn't have any revenue when we were investing. And the reason is because it was the first time I've seen an app go viral with merchants. It's a bookkeeping app that's just gone viral with Egyptian merchants and Moroccan merchants and Turkish merchants, and to the surprise of the person who built this app. And everybody has been trying to build something about bookkeeping in Africa. I think the reason this one worked is they've made it convenient and very simple, deceptively simple, actually. But the technology he's built behind to make this happen is very sophisticated. The use case you will see when you use it will sound very simple, but it's very hard, again, to digitize this and make it work as well as the analog equivalent. So people building startups in Africa have to think very hard about UX. I think UX is actually a stronger value prop than price in this market. And this is sort of my contrarian position. It's not price, it's UX. And so I'll stop there for now and go back to the questions. But my point is,
great.
If any, there is room to build a lot of transformative startups in Africa. Again, these are the ones I come up with. There are a lot more where that probably I cannot imagine. Claude, I'm happy to take questions and comments now. How much more time do we have?
We have 15 minutes, and we're gonna make it count. So thank you so much, Tidjane, for this presentation. We can stop the sharing of the slide deck for now. And as you stop sharing, I wanted to share an anecdote, which is a conversation I had with one of my other Senegalese friends. His name is Pape Diouf, and he actually his father had been Abdou Diouf had been president of Senegal. And he's an old friend of mine, and he is one of the people who wrote the business plan for the very first telco in Senegal for Sonatel when they were launching. And he said to me that what they had projected at that time, that by 2020, Senegal would have about 300,000 users. And now, if you look at the GSMA intelligence from 2022, there's actually 20 million cellular mobile connections in Senegal. So it's interesting how people fail to appreciate the immense power that the phone would have. And the example that you shared around Wave and digital payments is really important, right? With the barber and everything else. But my question actually, before I get to the questions in the chat, has to do with capacity building. I know it's an overused word, but I want to maybe give an example of a very well-known Nigerian fintech, and that's Flutterwave. So I've been following that company for a while because one of the founders, who actually was on this webinar last year, is a protege and a very close friend of mine for many years. They have been under attack recently because, as you probably know, and as some of this people on this webinar participants list know, they've been hacked twice last month. And this is just weeks after they were, they were breached for almost $6 million back in February. And so they keep having, these attacks on the system. And when you're dealing with financial technology, the main thing is trust. So people are having a hard time trusting some of these new African fintechs and the platforms. So my question to you on capacity building, and it relates to education, is, do you, Tidjane, think that Africa has enough developers and enough technological talent to be able to fully deal with the resilience that is needed to establish fully trusted financial technology systems across the continent?
I love that question. The simple answer is no, of course not. We don't nearly have enough talent for what's being built across the region. And it is actually the biggest struggle right now for startup scaling in Africa is to find, grow, and retain talent. So these platforms, whether people like Gebea again, or Decagon in Nigeria, who are trying to find scalable ways to increase this talent pool, are important. They're a really important part of the ecosystem. But then I want to add something about this, what you shared about these startups being hacked and such. It points for me to the fact that, because whoever hacked them was probably also a local talent. So I remember when I was 10 years ago, I was in Côte d'Ivoire, and the minister of youth was telling me about the brouteurs, these young people who just sat in cyber cafes and were running scams on the internet. And he was complaining about them. And I was telling him, I have a different view. Because if you look, these kids who are running scams on internet, they taught themselves how to use internet. They became savvier than a lot of people in the world, and they're using internet to scam them. What I saw was people who were learning on their own about a new technology and trying to make money out of it. I was just thinking, how do we find illegal activity for them to do rather than this? But what my point is, the talent pool needs to grow. It's not enough, but people are teaching themselves locally. The best talent you'll find around is self-taught, and they're doing it because they see opportunities. So I'm hopeful that we're building this talent pool as we speak. My only worry is actually when you look at places like Nigeria, we're producing a lot of this talent, but we're also losing it very fast. So there is something there around finding the right balance between getting enough talent out there and keeping them in our countries.
Thank you, Tidjane. Before we get to Khadija Ba's question, I did want to pick one question from the Q&A that came. I wish we could pick them all, but this one is from Joost Bonsen. And Joost has been really my single biggest champion and guide and sparring partner since I arrived at MIT as a student. And he and I have been talking about these issues of African technology and startups for a long time. And his question is, what's the role of diaspora in starting, investing, founding, building startups either on or for the continent? Are mass fragmented remittances getting organized into investment funds? And are the diaspora returnees increasingly relevant or of diminishing importance?
I love this question. It gives me opportunity to diss on the diaspora and on a lot of people in this room. Listen, I'll answer this from a very personal perspective and then from a more global one. I moved back to Africa 20 years ago to start a company. I was young and stupid and thought I would save the world. I failed miserably. And in retrospective, that failure was very predictable because here is what happens. You leave your country at 18 to go study, and you come back 10 years later to start a company in your country because it's the market you know. You don't know this market. You left it at 18. You don't know how people work in this environment. You have zero local context. So you will fail. Unless you acknowledge the fact that you're completely new to this market and you work accordingly. And this is, I think, where I failed and where a lot of people in the diaspora struggle for the first few years. It is not that they don't know about the market, it's that they don't acknowledge that gap in their knowledge. But where I'm going to diss on the diaspora is I see today, again, a lot of the transformative companies in Africa have been built from a deep understanding of local problems. And this is, I think, where the people who are on the ground, who live on the ground, have a real edge. Their understanding of these problems is really critical. It takes a few years. It doesn't. So when I talk to the diaspora, anybody in the diaspora pitching me a startup, my first question is, yes, when do you move back and start? Because I know that the moment you land, your view of the business you wanted to build will start shifting and evolving towards something more realistic, more closer to the ground. So if I look at our portfolio today, I have very few returnees we've bet on. Our best companies are run by people who, if they are returnees, have been back for a long time. So that for diaspora. By the way, the picture I'm painting is a bit generalist. It depends on the countries. It depends on some countries don't have yet a very strong local talent pool, and it shows. Just if we come to the remittances, again, I think this is a place where we are overestimating what's going on from the diaspora and underestimating the local, what's going on locally. When I met the founders of Wave, one of the most important things they told me was everybody is focused on international remittance, but the flow of money between just people in downtown Dakar and the outskirts of Dakar is much higher than anything the diaspora is sending to Senegal. So we care, we want to work on that flow of money. So again, remittance, international remittance, great. Local remittance is much larger. And then it goes to payments, local transactions. So I've learned to consider these international remittance as sort of a stepping stone toward building something about the local flows. I think the local flows are more important and should be our focus for now.
Thank you, Tidjane. I now want to give the mic to Khadija Ba, who is a student at MIT. She was the head of the Africa Business Club at MIT. And Khadija, maybe you can turn on your video and ask your question.
Hi, Claude. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask this question. And hi, Tidjane. Good to see you again.
Same here.
So the question that I had, I remember at the beginning of the call, you had mentioned that we've been underestimating the speed and the depth of technology adoption on the continent. I'm very curious to know what new technologies or industries do you think we're underestimating now, just in terms of business needs, in terms of business opportunities, and why do you think we're underestimating them?
You were trying to trap me into making a prediction that I will get. But then if I'm going to be wrong, let me be provocatively wrong. One area that I think of is hardware. And I'm thinking of a specific type of hardware. Everything around energy and mobility, for instance. I think people are underestimating how fast we are going to switch to electric, and how fast we are going to build models that enable this. As we speak, for instance, there are startups across the region building e-bikes, e-mobility solutions. And what I like about what they're doing is they're designing this hardware. They're making a lot of it in China, but they're designing this hardware locally. And they're designing new ways to deploy this hardware that is very local. They're designing battery swapping networks. And this is just an example. This have happened many times with clean tech. Solar panels were deployed across the continent with pay-as-you-go models, and people design these things locally, build them elsewhere. I think we are going to see more and more hardware startups in Africa pop up and distribute small hardware at scale across the region and operate it, if I can make one. Another easy one, very easy one, it is, with everything that's going on with AI, people maybe will forget that across the region, again, startups are using AIs in very simple sorry, I can't say that word, in ways that are not very easy to spot. Every fintech you see around here is already using AI for credit scoring, of course. When I was talking about operations at scale earlier, what I didn't say is that one of the ways to scale operation in real life, you're working with something that is messy, not organized. And this is where machine learning really works. And I can see how all of these startups are already using machine learning to drive better, more efficient logistics. And again, they're not shouting that on the top of their lungs, but they're just doing it. I see that already in, when I look at these healthcare startups. Again, they're all using machine learning in a way that are counterintuitive. For instance, our own Reliance is using it to bring fraud down to a level that is impressive for the industry. And they've been doing this for years. They're not talking about it. So we are probably underestimating how much AI is already being used and is going to be used across the region.
Thank you so much, Jan. We are at time. We only have 1 minute left. And so I did want to ask you our final question, which is 3 books that you would recommend to this audience, because our students and researchers are always very interested in what our leaders are reading.
I struggle with this, Claude, because I am an obsessive reader. I read a lot, and my normal answer is just read anything you can lay your hands on, but read a lot of it. But I felt, okay, for this audience, because you're talking about investment and startup in Africa, I will go back to my basics. I cannot not recommend Clayton Christensen's book about how you will measure your life, because I think it speaks to people graduating from, Harvard, MIT, and such, and it asks everybody an important question about what you will do with your life. So an easy, very short book to read. But then my second book, again, when I learn new things, I like to go back to basics. And when I entered VC 6 years ago, I was a bit scared I had a big imposter syndrome actually, and like all of us do, but I went to this book and it gave me the basics of what a venture deal is. And, you know, I built everything from that. And then my third book, just because I love science fiction, this is one of the my latest reading. And why I wanted to recommend it, it sort of tells a story that's set in India in 2047, so very near future. And the author does a great job of showing how really advanced tech will work in our emerging markets, how it will be, you know, in our everyday lives, and still we will use it in these completely unexpected ways, how it will meddle with our culture, how it will work with our informal merchants and everything. And whether it's quantum computing or AI, it will just be integrated in our culture and how we work. I think he did a very good job of doing this about India. He did another one about Brazil. I'm waiting for his book about Lagos. But I think it sort of makes me excited about how technology will invade our lives.
Thank you so much, Tidjane. This has been a fantastic session. We could have kept going for another hour. And I just want to remind everybody, we don't have a session next Thursday. Normally it's every Thursday, but we don't have one next Thursday. However, we will be back in 2 weeks, actually, on Thursday, April 20th. And this will be a special session with Nicolas Kazadi, who's the Minister of Finance in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's going to be about Africa's new model development. We always try to balance out policy leaders, government officials with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists like Tidjane. And we're so happy to have had so many wonderful participants and questions coming in today. Thank you, Tidjane. Thank you, MIT Africa. Thank you, MIT Center for International Studies. Thank you, True Africa University team. We're on. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, or day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.